Atsushi is a professor of neuroscience working with both primates and humans. And his fantastic recent project, which he will share with us, is going to shed light on our highest cognitive capacities, cognition, and all what is called nowadays social neuroscience. So, Atsushi.
All right. I have been interested in evolution of human intelligence in the primate brain. And that's an accumulation of the many accidents. And the evolution goes exactly that way. And I would like to do that, explore that in the way of natural sciences. So this is the general framework of my study. And under the theme of the West-East, East-West relations, I would like to make some comparisons in purpose, how to interpret the data, scientific data, and how we can advance our knowledge or make conceptual advances, and sometimes materialistic advances beyond the border of existing framework. That's how the evolution came about. And I think to unify the Western point of view or Western tendency of looking at things and Eastern tendency of looking at things have to be unified to overcome this boundary limitations. And this is another topic I would like to make during my talk. And before going too long, I just briefly introduce the framework of my talk. So as I told you, there's many boundaries in this world. Our body has a boundary, a physical boundary, which is our skin. And all the organs and even the brain are in our body. And that body interacts with physical world, which is another boundary that's explained by physics. And Western science tends to have a tendency to settle boundary condition, at least recent few hundred years, and then interest go toward the inside of the boundaries and try to acquire the precision and accuracy of the components or elements to reduce it. And then after knowing the components, try to reconstruct the whole thing based on the causalities. I think that's a Westerner's way or Occidentalish way of looking at things. But at the same time, the world is complex and wide. So there's much more component outside the boundary as well, which we don't know, the causality of the things, causal chain of the phenomena. But we know that exists. And if we are facing some problem to be solved, like during evolution, like adaptation to the immediate climate change or whatever, if you are a medical doctor, you have to save the patient's life in a limited time. Without knowing those precision, we have to handle that. And I think Easterners tends to be good at those without knowing exact causal relations, reserving some ambiguity remain, but one can manipulate it to reach the desired conclusion. And that's actually doing the same thing, but how to put emphasis on which side, that's some differences that we have. So today's talk, in the primate brain, primate ancestors, our brain expands, become bigger. And within our brain, the mind emerges. The mind can create the world outside the physical boundary, which is metaphysics based on symbolic manipulation of languages. And that crosses the boundary by expanding the capacity of the brain. And the way to interpret it, simple reduction doesn't work for this. That's I would like to make. And after made this boundary exceeded the boundary, we can look back to our body. I will call it objectifying our body, acquiring a third person's view of body. That gives you more capacity to cross the border. And in the first part of my talk, using about first like 30 minutes or so, I would like to explain, based on solely on my own data, the biological mechanisms of how these phenomena happened by introducing a concept of triadic niche construction. I'll tell you about this later. And this is the first part of my talk. And I would like to further extend my speculation into outside domain of the whole world, which is metaphysical world, to explain how the linguistic faculty or conceptual component, conceptualism, can be acquired through the extension or extrapolation of this brain expansion mechanisms. And probably the tool, mechanism to you too, is a good, one of many good reasons or good mechanisms to cross this border. So this is, I'm going to talk in the last half of my talk, touching a little bit upon, since Giacomo was here, with the mirror neuron mechanism in the brain. So this is a large framework of my talk. To start with evidence. I have started to train the monkeys and very artificial tasks, which has been thought to be human-specific. That is to train the monkey with using tools, which usually they never do in the forest, but could be trained in rather short period of time, which is like 10 days or 2 weeks. And this monkey can collect food not by viewing this directly, but viewing through this video camera, like the video game. And if you look back from the monkey's head, it looks like this. And if you superimpose some spot in the video, he thinks that something is there and tries to take it, even though he cannot. He's frustrated by this, but meaning that monkey's brain can handle this as his extension or projection of his body in the monitor. So this is already crossing the boundary of physical skin boundary into extension of the tooth or projecting onto the video monitor, as if your body is extended across the border. So these are the phenomena, but this could be artificial trained. And what is the neural correlate of this? Many of persons in this audience have heard this before, so I will go this very rapidly. But where I recorded the brain activity from is the parietal cortex, where the somatosensory information and visual information related to the body parts. Probably Enric will talk about this a little bit later, but there exists a group of neurons that's integrated those visual and somatosensory information related to the hand to unify those informations related to body parts. And I call it bimodal neuron. And when the monkeys were trained, after monkeys were trained tools, this receptive field of this neuron expands along the tool. So in the beginning, about 20 years ago, when I first submitted this paper, the reviewer asked me, you have to define what is actually what this neuron is actually coding. Either at that time, what, 1990s, the coordinate transformation was a major explanation for this. If it is a body-centered coordinates or space-centered coordinates or tool-centered coordinates. And many things could be explained that way, but I refuse it. That's why I didn't go through the good journal. But there's a many alternative explanation about this. One explanation I took is that this is coding the image of the hand. And by using it, the image of the hand extends along the tool. That's one interpretation. And there's alternative interpretation is that outside object, which is a tool, is incorporated into the body. So that's the direction of thinking is the other way around. But both are true, in addition to the coordinate transformation explanation. So in these cases, the neural activity, the representation of the neural activity can be ambiguous. We may be able to define in certain conditions to reduce it to one component that these are representing, but we didn't have to. And this is the reason why my experiment itself expanded later, as I'm going to tell you now. If I reduce it in one element, maybe I have occupied with that idea and didn't evolve afterwards. So this is already a part of the phenomena, how Westerners and Easterners look differently at those single phenomena, and allowing this ambiguity and allowing this multiple interpretation of polysemy or double meaning, I think that is one of the clues of innovations or evolution to happen, to go farther across the border, beyond the border. And during my first half of the talk, I will embed some keywords towards the last half of the talk to prime your brain. And here, the keyword is equivalence. So in this neuron, in parietal cortex, this neuron responds identical to the hand and the tool. So it establishes the equivalence between hand and tool. You can express this as incorporation of the tool into the body or extension of the body, but it establishes equivalences. That means that you cannot differentiate tool or hand by just looking at the neural discharges. But if you think about this, this is kind of a very crazy thing. The tool, object, and hand cannot be the same. But it's regarding this as the same, although it's physically different. So probably the German philosophers will say this Aufheben, creating the new concept. But it doesn't have to be. If it's useful, you can use it that way. So this is equivalence, is one of the concepts I would like to. Sorry, I'm not used to this thing. And another thing, I'm not going to tell you about the detail of the data, but these representations, I thought, roughly correspond to the evolution of the stone tools in past parallel history of the humans. But I'm not getting to this point. But another point important here is that once the monkey learned to use tools, he can create almost automatically the syntax of the action or sequential structure of the action afterwards, which looks like this. If a monkey were exposed to the condition that he needs to combine long tool and short tool and place the bait in the different location, he almost automatically understand and create these sequences. That's the kind of structure of the phenomena that automatically rise up in your hand, in the monkey's hand. And you cannot train them from the beginning. There's some layers or hierarchical orders. You have to train monkeys to use tool first, and then exposed to this situation, and they can immediately acquire it. There's something happening there. And accompanying this training, which takes about 10 days, we first found a series of genetic expression in this particular part of the brain during this particular period of the training. And I just show you the very first findings of immediate early gene, but there are several genes after this. And accompanying this gene expression, we found that new intracortical circuit was induced or formed by the training, which I show you is the connection between a temporal parietal junction and this intraparietal area, which we found the neuron from. And in the beginning, 20 years ago, I thought this is reorganization of the integration pattern of the information. This is a higher visual area, and how is it fed to this basically some sensory parietal cortex. That changes the reorganization or the mode of the integration of how the brain unifies some sensory and visual information. However, it accidentally, I found, this is another accident, it corresponds to the area where multiple neuron systems meet together. I heard this morning from Giacomo, the action mirror neuron system, and also the emotional mirror neuron system as well. And these have some overlap in between. But there are other mirror neuron systems that represent your perceptual recognition in social context. Like I'm getting back to this later, but like temporal parietal junction or medial prefrontal cortex. And in the monkeys, if this is not connected, this mirror neuron system, which establishes the equivalence of self and others, as Giacomo expressed in the way, it generalizes the agent. But at the same time, you can say this, that establishes the equivalence of self and others based on common actions or common meaning or intention. So if it is equivalence between self and others are established, that makes a social structure. In a way, probably East and West are different in a way that put emphasis on self or others or relation in between. That's how, depends on the culture or depends on the development of the mirror neuron system, how we structure our society. That could be interpreted in both ways, but have some differences based on the historical or context of development. But anyway, so mirror neuron system, if they work independently, independent mirror neuron systems already have their functions for action, creation, or understanding, or whatever we say, or other functions. But it doesn't have to work together. When the whole mirror neuron system works together by linking each other, there we can establish the core concept of the self, which I think non-human animals do not have without language. This point I come back to later. But this connection will accidentally be there. And I will come back to this mirror neuron connections later. But before going to that, I was interested in the structure of the two U's, of the tools. Because the combination of the two U's have some premise that the basic two U's learning have to be learned first. But then I came to the idea that, thinking that what kind of the tools that humans are using. Up to now, the most of the tool use study or definition of the tool is some external object held by your hand and interact with external environment. This is definition of tool in most of the literatures. But if you think about the kind of the tools that the humans are using, there are many other kinds. Something that held in the hand to interact is externalization of hand. But there are many tools that externalize your sensory organs, like binoculars or microphones. That kind of tools are almost never attempted in monkeys. So I thought we can train the monkey with a kind of endoscope, external camera held in hand, and explore other places. And I tried to train the monkey with this task for like 4 or 5 years, and it didn't work at all. In the beginning, the rake study, I thought it was difficult, but it took only half a year to establish the procedure. After procedure established, we can train them in 10 days. But this externalization of the sensory organ didn't work for 5 years. And then we came up with this structured layer composition of the tool, and we came across with the idea that why not attach the sensory cue at the tip of the rake, which already monkeys have. This is not externalized eye, but there's a mirror attached on this side. And the monkey cannot see beyond the hump. The monkey can explore using the mirror as a sensory cue. And this could be trained or can be acquired in a few days. It was a very easy task for monkeys. So this is not externalization of the sensory organ itself, but this is kind of, after a monkey acquired to modify their body image, what about putting the sensory cue, a little bit of the tricks at the tip of it? And that it was very easy. And then after several trials, several steps of structure, we became able to train the monkey to use kind of endoscope. This is the camera attached to the rake and made the plate transparent. And this is front view. The monkey is exploring below the table, which he cannot see. And this is a scenery that the monkey is actually seeing. It's like an endoscope or gastro camera that doctors look into your stomach. And this is externalize your own eye, stick it at the tip of the rake or the stick, and explore it. And this could be trained based on the basic structure. And the next question is, what happens when externalized eye look back to your body? I call it self-objectification process, or acquiring a third person's view of yourself, or meta-self-recognition. This is sometimes even difficult for humans to be trained. You need some spiritual training to acquire this third-person view, to have better self-control. If you look outside from your own eyes, your body is special. You cannot objectify yourself, control yourself. You need this externalized mind to look back to yourself. And now, in this mirror neural system, how the self-objectification come about is that metaphorically, perceptual self discovers active self. And this new circuitry formed by a little bit of modification enabled this self-objectification processes. And here's some experiment. This is done by humans. And in the scanner, the subjects were asked to look at this video. 3 persons throwing the ball at each other from different view. And during this observation task, subjects were asked to press a button in 2 conditions. In one condition, in this red one, subjects were asked to press the button when red person throwing the ball to the blue person, and at top of the trajectory, press a button. And in another condition, the subject were asked to press the button when black person catch the ball and press the button and throw back to the ball to the other person. If you look back at this movies, depends on the timing of the pressing button. Although there's viewing this identical scenery and identical actions, you perceive yourself looking yourself from various conditions, or yourself observing somebody else's condition. And by designing the 2x2 factorial design, switching the scenery and pressing the button, you can calculate the brain activity that represent the occasion that yourself is looking at yourself, third-person view, from different angle of the space. And that's kind of self-objectification. And that lights up the temporal junction. So this is one of the human equivalent of the self-objectification processes by linking 2 mirror neuron systems. And this is the temporal junction. And since Giacomo kindly touched upon my recent paper this morning during the discussion, I just want to briefly introduce this. I was not meaning to introduce this, but this is only new data that I am talking today. Others are old data. But this is, we accidentally encountered the Japanese macaques that spontaneously exhibit autistic trait, like ill social interactions or repetitive behavior. This is typical of autistic behavior. During recording from many monkeys and mirror neurons in various areas. And this accidentally encountered this. And in these monkeys, in the prefrontal cortex, medial prefrontal cortex, which looks, the structure looks normal in the MRI scanner, but they lacked mirror neurons that respond to self and other actions, which are common in normal monkeys. And genetic analysis detected that this particular monkeys have some rare variants linked with the human autistic behavior. So this is kind of a correspondence. We cannot establish a causal relation between these 3 phenomena, but these 3 phenomena go together: behavioral abnormality, and neural abnormality, and genetic abnormality. And that is found in medial prefrontal cortex. So what's in medial prefrontal cortex? And this system objectify themselves, and by looking yourself by your own eye, so what kind of the perception you acquire? You will acquire the existence of yourself, continue from past, present to the future. If you're looking from your own eye, the outside world, you just live in the immediate world. Like non-human animals are very immediate creatures. They don't think about the future. But if you have acquired a third-person view, a continuation of yourself across time, you will have your future perspectives. And then what happens is that if you have some useful information now, you probably want to save it for future and use it later. That is next externalization of the body part, which is the oops, it's too much. I think I'll stop using this. That's externalized brain, like external memory device or writing or pictures. That's something the human brain acquired recently. And we haven't done the neural recording for externalized brain yet, but probably these are the structures that our brain, or primate brain, acquired through the expansion, through the evolutionary processes. And after acquire the future view, what we will do is that we plan for better future. We always plan for the better improvement of the future. And that revises evolutionary perspectives. The famous natural selection, that original species that Darwin proposed, is a combination of environmental changes and genetic mutation. And genetically mutated species are selected by environment, which is most adaptable to that. This is all passive and the probabilistic procedures. However, if the animal's activity creates or improves the environment, what happens? This is concept of niche construction that Darwin actually proposed later. And typical example is a beaver. Beaver is often used as example that there's mountain animals, but they create the dam and create a new environment, which is called niches. And they are satisfied there. So this is called niche construction. But beaver never tried to improve the dam or modernize the dam or create water conditioners or heaters during the winter. They stop there because they are satisfied and occupy their niches, and it's enough for their survival. But what humans do is that since we have a future perspective and we can create a tool and embed it in the environment, like this building or cars and so on, we can intentionally keep improving the environment. That is a human instinct. Probably everybody hopes for peaceful and good living, better living in the future, and so on. Everybody try to that. We cannot help doing that. So this is, I named this ecological niche construction. This is the first niche of the triadic niche construction that I would like to propose. And this is something what human can do constantly with positive feedback, constantly improving the environment. And then after the environment was changed, our brain adapted the new environment to have a better living there. And that I call it a neural niche construction. What we found is that during the course of the tool-use training, which takes about 2 weeks, we found, using the box-based morphometry, found expansion of the gray matter of this particular monkey. We reproduced in three or four monkeys. But the gray matter expansion happens as much as 20% by the MRI signals. In the human MRI, there's many comparison studies, like professional mathematicians have like 3% thicker gray matter than average people, or something like that. But in this case, each individual monkey, because they acquired a completely novel skill, which is a tool use, their brain expands massively in a short period of time. And this corresponds to the location of the primate brain or human brain that expanded most during the course of evolution. And what is parietal cortex, this part of the cortex, doing by comparing monkeys and human brain is that these are surrounded by primary sensory area, which is somatosensory, auditory, and visual area in monkeys and humans. Both are the same. And what is parietal cortex doing here is that they are controlling the movement. That's what coordinate transformations theory has came about 20 years ago. By transforming the visual coordinate or body-centered coordinate system, we can create a movement of the eye or hand or head or the body. These are all the structures we can move in the environment. And if you plot these areas responsible for this creation of this movement, monkey's parietal cortex is almost occupied or filled with these functions. And actually, in the monkeys in the forest, arboreous conditions, our ancestors needed this integration of this information to jump around in the forest. That's why the primates have larger parietal cortex than rodents, which is basically two-dimensional. However, if this information processing mechanism is useful, we put more resources on it. That's a principle of the biological organisms. Like the tool-use trained monkeys have expansion of the parietal cortex, and that's stabilized the system. And at the same time, the same principle could be applied to novel functions. Like a tool-use function or elongation of the hand image, I think that was originally, this is just a hypothesis, originally prepared to be ready for growth of the body. You know, monkeys and primates born at this small, among the adults, we become bigger. And our motor control has to be adapted to it. Then some kind of fringe is already prepared in advance. And maybe two happen to be function within that fringe. And we can apply the different mechanism got ready for the other purposes, but useful for this two use. So this is a kind of alternative usages or multiple functions or polysemy of the functions. And the expanded brain allow more resources for this new function, and thereby gradually expanded this area using the same principle to the novel functions. And this is actually the area that handle numbers, that's Stan's area. And I think this matches with your neural recycling theory, using the same principle to use for other purposes. And in humans, we use parietal cortex in many different higher cognitive functions, like number processing, time processing, or language. This is supramarginal gyrus, this language area. And other things, as numbers, symbols. This is many of these functions, but using the same principle or spatial processing. Now think about any languages in the world expressing the logics of the logical thinking. They use spatial metaphor, the basis of the something, a fundamentalist, bridging the idea, or put on top of it something behind, the truth behind it, some obstacles or whatever. They use all the languages, all the culture uses spatial metaphor to handle this function, meaning that the same identical principle are utilized for novel cognitive function, which I call it the cognitive niche construction. And so, hereby, from natural selection to intentional niche construction, probably our environment and cognitive functions and brain have triadic interactions of three kinds of niches. And they expanded gradually to create our good life now. And this cannot be explained by simple boundary conditions and reductionist way of thinking. If you look at the same phenomena in, I would say, more orientalish way of thinking, allowing ambiguity, polysemy, and so on, that allows us to create the new function beyond the existing boundary conditions. And what is good about this is that you can ground the cultural component of our mind into biological phenomena. This is created based on languages. Without languages, it's difficult to create our level of culture. You can say that monkeys have a culture, that's true, but the qualitative that's different. And this component has been out of the boundary of the natural sciences. Scientists didn't consider it as a science because it's difficult to prove this will reproduce and so on and so on. But with this structure, we can ground this on it. And you might think that how this expansion, which is just a learning process, can be transmitted to the next generation. Otherwise, it cannot be the evolution mechanisms. I'm sorry that I cannot have time to explain all of this, but this can be explained by extragenomic or epigenetic evolvable mechanisms that recently emerging. Actually, I'm working on this, but I don't have the data to show you today. But in very short, the evolution is not necessarily driven by the genetic mutation in the beginning. If the information are embedded in the environment, like our cases, our creation of our new information, you can embed it in the environment, and next offsprings can share this new information outside our body. And through the epigenetic processes, we can manipulate the expression of the genetic pattern. And after some generations, those modified genetic expression pattern can be mutated in such a way to be expressed automatically. This is called Baldwin effect. In this sense, changes in outside environment or intention comes first, and genetic mutation follows it to adapt to that. This totally different way of thinking, but talking about the same phenomena. But briefly, this is just the case, and I don't get into too much on this. The next thing is that by this expansion can be explained by triadic niche construction that I told you. And once it's crossed the border at some point, you can further expand it by recursion, not just to the physical body, but to the mental yourself, conceptual self. And this recursive structure leads to you to create the metaphysical world based on symbolics or languages. And this is hypothetical speculation I would like to spend latter half of my talk based on the data, that to expand this phenomena across a border, we need languages. And there's many theory about evolution of languages, but one thing that I can think of based on our own data is that language necessitates two components, which are naming or labeling and syntactic structure. The meaning that we have to assign some signs or symbols to one thing, which is naming of it or labeling it. And based on those names or labels or words, we structure the other multiple components and put it into the higher conceptual structure, which is expressed by languages. And these two components must be emerged in the primate brain. And again, the tool use and mirror neural system seems to be one of many, but efficient component to explain this. So what I did is that I combined the tool use training with monkey call-producing training. The Japanese monkeys, or macaque monkeys, produce calls, but it's very rarely. Don't produce calls too much. And most of the calls are unfriendly, aggressive calls, like scaring others or frightened. And there's only one call, it's not only, but it's a very rare one call. It's called coo calls. That is friendly call or non-aggressive call. It's called like coo. Am I right? Coo. That is call your mother or food or whatever. The friendly situation, they produce this call. But most of the cases, it's only emotionally. If you're lonely, call for others, it produces coo. Or if you're hungry and want food, it produces coo. And it has to be linked with emotional systems. Monkey cannot produce arbitrarily language-like voluntary vocal productions. So this is one of the key. And then we combined the tool use training with producing any kind of coo calls. Actually, it's very difficult for humans to differentiate different kinds of coo calls. It's almost impossible. And what I did is that in the monkey sitting situation, if when a monkey produces a coo call, or we can call it situation A, then we give him the food, but out of the reach. He can eat it. And then in this situation, when he produces a coo call again, in the situation B, we give him a 2. Then he can eat it. And in the situation that monkeys are having a 2, but no food, and he produces a coo call, then give a food, so he can eat it. So these are 3 kinds of conditions. And the experimenter did not shape any calls, differential call, but just ask them to produce any kind of a call he wants to produce. And in the first day, so they can differentiate the call only in 5 days. In the first day, in the situation A and B and C, all the calls look identical. This is just a shape of the 7th harmonics of the coo calls. And this call was different from the call D, which is the mother call. The monkeys calling for their partner or mother. So, and they produce a different calls, but in the same kind of the calls. But after a few days, these 3 kinds of calls in 3 different situations tried to became kind of fluctuated, have a variation to it spontaneously. We didn't shape them. So they started to produce a different kind of calls in different situations. And after 5 days, it was crystallized into 2 kinds, which is call B and the group of call A and C. And what were these calls corresponded to? If you look back into the situation, both in call A and call C, monkey get food after this. And call B, monkey get tool after this. So probably our interpretation is that monkey spontaneously associated the situation with voluntary system, voluntary tool-use control system. And there, I told you, there already exists an emotional call production system controlled by medial part of our limbic system. And this lateral cortex system have a voluntary tool-use control system, which is very demanding. By associating with it, probably lateral cortex have created some connection to directly control this call-producing center in the brainstem. So anecdotally, what we observed is that since monkey cannot produce voluntary call from the beginning, in the beginning, when monkeys are asked to produce any kind of call, it looks like they are struggling to recruit their emotional reactions, like doing this, and take a long time to produce a call. That means they use this circuitry. And after a while, we don't know the detail of this, but after a while, voluntary control center linked with voluntary vocalization control center. And this may be the beginning of the naming behavior and also the naming vocal production, which is the basis of the languages. And then after this naming was established, we need a syntax. We need a structure of it. And it may be emerged from this mirror neuron system. Because the mirror neuron, as Giacomo, the father, had explained this morning, you cannot differentiate the burst with what is the burst representing by just looking at the burst. It can respond to the others or self or actions or object that we want to reach. So it's all equivalent within it. However, if you look closely into the various kind of the mirror neuron responses, you start be able to differentiate it. So this is another hypothetical story that I would like to make, is that, again, this is the world, boundary of the world. And this is conventional Giacomo's mirror neuron system. In an emotional mirror neuron system, if there's any kind of cause in the world, the brain responds to that emotional reactions. And in the active mirror neuron system, when there's some goal, like apple there, the monkey wants to reach it, then the neuron bursts and the monkey reaches it. So this is many components of the action is mixed up, integrated, or in other words, in this burst. But if the two become incorporated in this mirror neuron activity, what happens is that two is external object in the beginning. It's not part of your body, or not yourself. Then what emerges here is that you will acquire this imagination, this is a hypothesis. You acquire the sense that yourself is controlling that object, like a transitive verb. And if the two external object is equivalent of your own body, you objectified your own body part, and then acquire the sense that yourself is controlling yourself to make actions. So the subjective yourself and objective self, which is the body, differentiate by using the tool. And to connect this, there's intention or actions. So this simple action in simple sentences have three components: subject, verb, and object. That's common across any languages in the world to express linguistically the actions. Need subject, verb, and object. This is the simplest sentences. And you look carefully in the burst patterns of the mirror neuron. I think this is the beauty of the experimenter who can directly observe the phenomena. It's not by using the interpretation of somebody else. Is that in the classical, conventional risolati type of the mirror neurons, the neuron responds when experimenter pick up a food in the container, it bursts. And if the monkey do the same thing, pick up the container from the food from the container, it bursts. This is mirror neurons. And also there are inhibitory mirror neurons. I think Mara asked this afternoon. It's not many, but if there's a neuron have a spontaneous activities, sometimes they are inhibited. So we call it inhibitory mirror neuron. I think I'm correct in a conventional sense. There exist these conventional mirror neurons. And if you think about the combination of the three components of the simple sentences, subject, verb, and object, this conventional mirror neuron is generalizing the subject, or based on the equivalence of self and others. So this is generalization of the agent, and you can put asterisk, interchangeable, of the subject, linked by combination of verb and object. And this is conventional mirror neuron. But after self-objectified monkeys, you can see other kind of the mirror neurons expressed in different ways. It's like this neuron responds when experimenter put the food with forceps in the container, and also respond when monkey use his fingers to pick up a food. So this content of the action is similar, but it's different. It's equivalent of probably similar to your two mirror neurons. And this is one example. So action itself is not identical, but equivalent. And object is the same. The other mirror neurons, there are neurons that you can exchange object as well. The other mirror neurons, this neuron, in this case, there's a container. And experimenter give the monkey the food with using this container. And this neuron responds when experimenter open the container and put the food in it, and afterwards close the container, it also fires. So the action is completely different, but related. And this neuron fires when monkey open the container, and he picks the food. And monkey never close the container to give it back to you, so we cannot record the monkey closing the container. But action is different. But content has something in common. And this neuron, this is inhibitory mirror neuron, is inhibited when experimenter open the lid of the container, put food in. And in this case, experimenter put this it's working. So, bad contact maybe. When monkey press the button of this machine, the container opens and he can get food. So action is open the container or press the button. It is completely different. That is this mirror neuron. One of the mirror neuron, like neurons, responds. So if you summarize this, I cannot get into detail, but there are three other combinations of the mirror neuron activity in regard under the light of the subject, verb, object constructions detected in the monkey brain. And if you think about a combination of these components, they have three elements. So combination, there should be 6 combinations, but monkey only have 4. So if all the 6 combinations are furnished, probably they can produce arbitrary sentences, but they cannot. So this equivalence is called functional equivalences. So meaning that to establish this equivalence, they have to have some concrete functions or materials in common to associate equivalences. And other can be interchangeable. And this is called functional equivalence in the psychological field. And after this arbitrary equivalence is formed, it's called stimulus equivalence. And we could not observe in monkeys, but can be done in humans. This is probably the last data that I can show you today, is that. Think about the theoretism, the combination of the logics. The logic thing is if A to B, if A then B logic is learned, it's combined with if B then C logic. This is theoretism, and this is logical. And this is trained logics. And what is peculiar about the human trait is that we automatically produce reverse logic. If you are learned if A, then B, if you are shown B, you automatically, most of us, automatically retrieve A without learning. This is called symmetry. And this is illogical. If you study the mathematics, this is illogical. But we do that automatically, all the time. So that is why in any culture, in any language, there's a warning saying that reverse is not true. That's why you have to be careful about it. In non-human animals, they never do this. If A then B logic was trained and exposed to B, they never pick up A. And if B then A logic, you want to, if you want them to produce it, you have to train them independently, because this is an independent phenomena, which is very logical. And if you combine it, it becomes serialism. And if the humans are exposed with C, we automatically retrieve A by combination of two illogical logics. And this is called stimulus equivalence. And what is good about this is that I took just example of the languages. If you are shown apple, picture of apple, you're trained to produce a sound apple. And if you hear the sound of the apple, you're trained to spell it out. Then if you look at this, you automatically retrieve this. So this is the basis of the languages, or basis of the concept formation. This thing and sound and spelling is completely different phenomena, different thing. And it's crazy for animals. It is dangerous, even dangerous, or risky, fatal for animals to automatically produce this. But this is beneficial because we can form concept by linking completely different things arbitrarily by some logics or some thoughts behind it. So this is the base of the concept formation and basis of the creation of language. That can go together. And if we do the experiment in Scanner using these linguistic structures, automatically retrieves the language-related brain area. So what I did in experiment is used this kind of arbitrary shapes and trained the subject with of these logics and show the subject this result and what happens when they pick up non-trained illogical theories. And we detected parietal cortex in both cases, in addition to the prefrontal cortex, is responsible for forming this kind of illogical inferences, which is wrong, but often useful in a human structure. But it's dangerous in animals. And these are handled by expanded parietal cortex. And this could be the basis of, or extrapolation of the mirror neuron system. How is good about creating our intelligent structure. So what we have explained is that by recursion of expanding, extrapolating this mechanism into more abstract domain of the cognitive function, we can create a metaphysical world based on languages. And based on these languages, maybe we can include this physical world in the linguistic logical structure, which is the principle of the physics. And still we have a boundary of this. And what we don't know now, this is my last slide, is that we are surrounded by dark matter and dark energy. We cannot even know about it, but even though it occupies 3/4 of our universe, and probably the tool use and brain mechanism to handling tools can cross this boundary of this materialistic world to unify our whole universe in not so far future, I expect. And thereby, we need to unify the Eastern way of thinking with Western analytical way of thinking based on configuration of the boundary condition, and which we do not have the fundamental theory to unify it yet. But probably we can aim it by unifying this Eastern-Western cultural different view, looking at same thing in a different way, but inclusive and mutually complementary. And I would like to end my talk by thanking my colleagues. This is a result of collaborations of many, many labs and many, many people related to art.
Atsushi, thank you for this brilliant talk. And I would like to open the discussion. Giacomo.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you to put this experiment on genetic in the autistic monkeys, which I think is a very seminal paper, and it's nice that you present to other people.
Yeah, just appeared last week.
Yeah. Then there is an experiment which you have not mentioned. I think it's very interesting, done by Akira Murata and Ishida, in which they demonstrated that your peripersonal space can be translated to the peripersonal space of others. That's similar to your tool, but it's related to the person. So it's fitting well with your extra personal capacity, to put it. But it's not inserted in your nice schema.
Well, there are many things I couldn't mention it.
So, but you agree on that? It's not mentioned because you feel it's something wrong with that?
No. Just this slide based totally on my own data. I didn't mention any other data of anybody else's. I should have, but...
No, because you mentioned it very nicely, this idea that you understand the other and so on, but you put this TPJ area, which is a mysterious area. Maybe in the parietal lobe it's also important.
And also the secondary smart sense area. That's I'm now working on. So far, nobody has touched upon that area, which is also the most expanded area. It's a medial operculum area. And that's, I think, a part of the whole system. But I didn't mention that at all.
Okay, thank you.
And there's, well, my stance is that there could be many interpretations, and to achieve the same result or same goal, there's many ways, and not necessarily, you should not define to one simple causality. That's evolution actually happened. If somebody used this and achieved this, that's it. You don't have to do others. So there's multiple areas. It's not mutually exclusive. I would say it's rather inclusive, and if we go farther, we might be able to find Aufhebend, a unifying principle behind it, but we don't know it yet.
So Wolf, and then Yuri.
Atsushi, what could be the mechanism for this illogical inference for the symmetry? New connections, a new area. It's probably not new learning rules, because they probably stood the same all the way through.
That I don't know.
Any idea what that could make? Because would it happen if you had more reciprocal connections between areas rather than these parallel streams that you have in monkeys? That you get these, not false, but illogical associations instead?
Well, I have never thought seriously about it yet, but the basic trends of all these phenomena is a duplication of existing resources. And duplicated resources have some room for other extended functions, sometimes wrong, often wrong, but sometimes useful. It's like a gene duplication also. They duplicated a gene and used for other purposes. And for this illogical inferences, probably expanded resources for process the logical stream have with some extra redundant connections or redundant information processing theory have emerged these funny logics. And it should be banned or suppressed in naturalistic non-human animals because it can be dangerous, it's risky. But a human somehow guaranteed, secured the usefulness by social structures or legal structures or whatever to make use of it. And, well, I cannot get further than that.
So, Yuri? Then Dini? Yuri.
The demonstration of the neurons that respond to both hand and the tool, I think that's fantastic. But I always wondered, where are those neurons that can tell the difference?
That is the point. You cannot tell the difference between tool and hand.
I'm interested in where are those neurons that do tell the difference. I know that you didn't find it, and the same thing with the mirror neurons is that I know that I'm putting my hand into my mouth, but I also, maybe the same neurons or some of the same neurons can fire there, but I can tell the difference. And the reason why I think it's becoming very practical today is because virtual reality becomes a tool, and it's no question that mice can learn a lot of tasks in virtual reality. But there are some recent studies, they show that the neurons behave very differently, not only similarly, but very differently. So where are those neurons that tell the difference between mirroring and the self?
Well, I didn't show today, but in the medial prefrontal cortex, there are neurons respond only to yourself or only to the others, and both to self and others.
Are these driven by corollary discharge?
That we don't know. We don't know. We just observed discharge patterns. And thinking of mice discussion, I have some reservation about the mice, how they handling the virtual reality situations. Even in the monkeys, we often encounter that they don't handle the stimuli, visual stimuli, in the way we expect them to. They're responding to some subtle noises or some signs that can be useful for solving that problem, but not in the way that we do. So in the mice case, I don't know, but they might be processing the virtual reality scenery in a completely different way than we do.
Why do you think that?
Why do it? Because even with monkeys.
I don't see any experimental evidence for that.
Oh, no, I'm just making stories, guessing. I don't know. But you said, since you said there's some difference in the neural response properties. So
Brain cells, for example, work very differently in virtual reality than in real environment. Vestibular system is, for one thing, is not active.
I see.
Atsushi, in this higher order generalizing mirror neurons, it wasn't clear they were recorded in parietal cortex?
It was in parietal cortex.
AIP or?
AIP and PFG.
Yeah, okay. And this is, you see this only after training with the tool or in a naive monkey?
We haven't tested naive monkeys, so
all this was recorded in the monkey that had been trained to use the tool. So you don't know to what extent?
No.
Okay, thank you.
We just haven't tried it.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious about your autistic monkeys. First, do they show hypersensitivity like in humans?
Well, we try to examine the human diagnosis, but it's not to that detail.
I see. Because this would be interesting also to look at the canonical circuits in the cortex,
that monkey
right?
already passed away, so we cannot do that
I see.
clinical examination.
And did you look at the mirror neurons in those monkeys?
Yeah, that's what I
okay, so this is the data,
this is the
because
paper.
I didn't understand.
But in the prefrontal cortex, not in the F5.
Exactly, this was my question. So only those of the prefrontal cortex. Okay. And I wanted to make a comment about what you say about the Eastern and Western scientists.
I was forced to make that.
Yeah. No, because I think it's also a problem of different fields, right?
Different what?
Fields of study. I mean, if you look at molecular biologist and you compare him or her with an electrophysiologist, probably there are even more differences than between Eastern and Western scientists. And this I learned because I come from the medical field and then I go into genetics and then back to more physiology. So it's a very different world, even more different than different fields.
Yeah, different disciplines use different words and different grammar.
Yeah, another example for the East-Western differences. We talked about it on Saturday night. I had a Chinese student who had been studying in Germany at the last year's at university. And then he did a PhD with me. And after a long series of experiments, it came the time when we had to do the control experiments. And unfortunately, the outcome of the control experiments seemed to contradict our main conclusions from the other experiments. For me, this was a catastrophe, not for my colleague, because he said, well, the conditions were different, the contextual embedding was different, we did many things different in the control experiment, so the outcome must be different. And that was it. There was no worry, because there were two different results coming from two different approaches, and a step for us, very difficult to support, that those two things could not be unified, didn't impress him at all. We did the control experiments because the reviewers requested them after a while, but...
Well, maybe I don't fully understand the situation, but if the result is different, I would try to find why it's different.
Yeah, because the the setting was different.
What?
The setting.
Setting.
Of course, if you do a control experiment, you vary all sorts of things, and then you get another result. And the match is only at a very abstract level. And so there was no match at this level, but there were two interesting results sitting next to each other, and the idea was let's leave it there. It's fine. The world is complex if you look at it from different aspects.
I see. Well, I have encountered in many cases that completely the results contradicts with each other. Sometimes within the lab, sometimes with the other labs. But my stance is that accept that view, but not stop there. Probably the result, well, this is my personal view. Results are different. It's okay. I mean, that's a fact. And because there are some reason for that. And if I were that student, I would try to find out the hidden mechanisms, what make that different. And that should be unified integrated to include those differences.
So maybe it was not a cultural difference, but just...
Wow.
So we have a series of questions. So Peter, Yuri, Mr. Dr. Aizbavas, correct? And then Stan.
Oh.
So, okay, so many questions now, but we have to squeeze it in time.
Yeah, so just because we are already into culture, I would like to ask some general question. You mentioned that animals don't change the environment, their environment, but in fact, many animals do. One example, because Balázs mentioned, I like birds. Birds plant forests, and the end result is they expand their population because they plant kind of forest that is good for next generations of birds. Yeah, and it's on big scale. So that's one change. And what do you think is the difference between us and these birds? Because many of the environmental changes that we do is driven by increasing our population or the security of our offspring, essentially.
So,
and whether there is any built-in mechanism or mechanism that can be trained that limits the improvement of our environment for our benefit and eventually bring the civilization to an end.
That's an example of the niche construction. I took the example of the beavers, and you mentioned about the birds, and there's the worms. So there are many of those examples. But the difference is that non-human animals do not try to improve farther and farther and farther. Humans always keep improving it, constructing in addition to it. In animals, well, non-human animals, if they have a new niche constructed, they monopolize that new created niches. And that's enough for them, and they're happy with it.
Yeah.
And
so
those are not intentionally designed.
Because we have the technology and to store information to improve with that information the next step. But you know that the stone tools were unchanging for hundreds of thousands of years.
In humans. So probably the process was slower. I think the stone tools, the first stone tools I showed, Oldovan artifact was 2 million years ago. Then the next Acheulean artifact was 150 million. 500,000 didn't change. And then what happened suddenly, about 30,000 or something like that, is something exploded. So probably exceeded some capacity of the brain, and that made us phase transition like changes.
Fire.
Oh, well, there are many things. So in the birds or other animals who use tools, that's within the capacity of stability, and they don't improve too much. And that's my explanation of differences. It's continuous, but have some phase transition in between, and human exceeded that border.
So Yuri, then Ice.
Whenever we have a new method, we have a new windows to the brain, so the knowledge is enriched very quickly. So you might expect, based on this, that if we view the brain differently, then we may enrich our knowledge. We began a conversation last night how wonderful it would be if the rich difference in Eastern cultures would somehow contribute differently than Western cultures. Now, I was looking for examples in your talk today, and you said that the boundary between the body, mind, and the environment is closer in Eastern societies than in Western societies, because there's a real boundary there. But I wondered if you had in mind Merleau-Ponty, Gregory, Jean Rode, Rodolfo Linnas, Prince, Alva Noe, just to name a few. And I wonder if earlier than these, are there any scholars in the East who emphasize that there is a continuum between the body and the brain? Because this is not necessarily the absolutely representative culture in the West, but there are many, many researchers who share that view. And I put myself in that group.
In the Eastern culture, the continuum between brain and the body?
Yeah. So are there any papers we can read where we can see similar things that, let's say, Merleau-Ponty was talking about?
Well, I think there's many. But I don't, many in Chinese at least. And
starting 1500s or
oh, much older. Like oldest medical book of Chinese, 2,600 years ago. This is Huan Di. Well, anyway, that describes the linkages of the brain and body and so on. And that's, I think that's a Chinese tradition to view.
I know in Buddhist culture that's
it's not Buddhist.
It's the universe.
It's not a Buddhist. I think it's before it. It's an Eastern way. I don't want to make a clear dichotomy between East and West, but that's an Eastern tradition. View as a whole. And not necessarily mind-body differences. The brain is a part of one of the many organs of the body that's in charge of the information transmission and information processing.
All those people that I mentioned independently realized this, or they stole the idea from Eastern?
Well, that's questionable. If you're looking at the same fact, it's reasonable to come up with those ideas, similar idea. It's not necessarily stealing. But many things emerges independently in East and West. Usually the East are earlier. Like a Machiavellian, it's completely different. Machiavellian politics book. That's almost dead copy from my view, from Sun Tzu's The Art of the War. And afterwards there's another philosopher, which is about 200 BC. And it was revived in Machiavelli in 17th century, 18th century. And many examples of those. One example I like is that there's a book called Book of Changes in Chinese philosophy. It's about 4,000 years ago, you can go back to. And almost identical structure you can see in the Greek tragedy and Sophocles plot. And it's a crazy idea. Probably there's some truth of a transition of the things. It's embedded in Eastern book. At the same time, about 3,000 years ago, in the Greek tragedy, Sophocles wrote in the tragedy, plot of the tragedy. And that's a similar plot in between. I don't think either one steals from the other. If that's the truth, the human brain can come up with in a different way, slightly different way, but a very similar way. So that's why I am claiming now that East and West have held together, integrate. We are facing much difficulty right now because of the maturation of the Western science culture. But Eastern way have some way of exceeding this boundary, and vice versa. Eastern Chinese culture have been so advanced for 2,000 years, and only recent 400 years, Westerners are doing much, much better because of this practical and concrete materialism. But it's getting matured, so it's like a seesaw, back and forth, but it's better be integrated. This is my stand, fundamental stance.
Excuse me.
We can talk more about it.
Just for the interest of time, we have 3 short questions. So Ais, Stan, and yes, let's start very shortly.
Atsushi, thank you very much. You live up to the expectation of the audience, and that's what the challenge that the moderator acknowledge, moderator imposed upon you. Now, firstly, with regard to a point of curiosity, you did not quite, confirm the non-disclosure that, in the context of brain at work, the mechanic of it, you have your, monkeys, continental monkeys vis-a-vis the equatorial or tropical monkey. You did not put the variation between the Japanese monkey in terms of mind at work with that of the, the tropical one. So the question is that, do you think that there's similarity? No, I don't think so, because you know why? It looks very much, if you look at the Japanese monkeys, they're very cultured. They live in a very difficult ecosystem, so you can't make comparison.
How about the Indian monkeys? They are very much cultured.
So, but you see, the question is that's what I'm trying to say. That the climatic and also the demographic is entirely different. Now, the question is that when you want to bridge the gap between the East and West, even in a monkey society, you need to know and understand the fundamentals. So how does you exclude that particular, fundamental issue? Because, you can't get to understand, your objectivity. So can you help me to understand?
Well,
Thanks a lot.
That's one of my interests right now, to make a difference between two different culture monkeys, but it's a close species. How the culture transmits, how that affects the brain structure or functions, and vice versa. And that's on the way. I don't have an immediate answer right now, but I'm working on it.
So, Stanislas?
Yes, I wanted to go back to the origins of language. And I was wondering if you wanted to introduce a distinction between sequences of actions versus the syntax of symbols. And the key distinction being that syntax requires more than just a sequence. It's not just a linear or one level structure. It really requires some form of recursion where you can embed elements into others. So I was wondering if there was any evidence for this sort of recursion in your experiments. I'm always very intrigued by the experiment with the rake, where the monkey uses one rake to catch a second rake. And maybe that looks a little bit like recursion, but at the same time I wonder whether in fact it's just that they learn the specific sequence of gestures by rote, and maybe it's just sequence.
I think that's just sequence or combinatory structure. There's no recursion in it. I expected that in the beginning, but so far I don't have any evidence in monkeys.
So could you generalize, for instance, to using one rake to catch another tool, or what's the extent of superficiality of this behavior? It was just trained behavior?
Well, I made them use, there's one ninja weapon, it's called chain something, anchor, and throw it and take it. That monkey can generalize. But there are limitations, and it's not as good as humans, of course. So it's sort of transition, but there are severe limitations. That's my only answer I can have.
So I think I agree with you about the importance of these reversal relations, but I would also put a sense of embedding or recursion as one of the key properties
I think so, yeah.
of the language system.
I haven't gone so far in this experiment.
My question is just curious for your experiment, when you talk about the tools and the extension of those, for your monkey experiment, would it be, especially for the needs of food and so forth, play around with some of the robotics toys that you have in Japan, and let the monkey use a robotics means to get your food and see how the neuron would react? Would you be considered going to that type of experiment?
I think you did it, right? Not the same thing. But I haven't done it. But
okay, because I was just thinking about your ideas of, because the framework that you have, you talk about how, the tools and borders, that is why, that is for monkey. And then for human, since you had the MRI and so forth, what would that be, especially be stimulated with artificial intelligence and machine learning? How would then we see ourselves in others?
One thing I did try and publish is that, the robot or equipment called UFO catcher, the crane that catches the toy, using XY coordinates, and monkey can do that. And we did PET study, I think, and lights up the prefrontal and parietal cortex by using this UFO catcher. That I did.
No, I do not mean extensions of a Terry operator type. That means train your monkey in such a way as switch on a gadget, and then the robot has to pick up food and bring it back to him.
Yeah, that's what I did.
No, rather that means it is not using any of the remote, that means through the hands extension. It's just simply by a switch, and then let it pick up, and let the robot pick up the job.
So what the monkey do is not controlling it, but by just switching on the program robot.
Yes.
I haven't done it.
Because from there, then if it was a study for human,
but
artificial intelligence and machine learning, how would then our mirror neuron would react?
Just switching, monkey can learn by simple associations. I think that's easier for monkey. But the brain mechanism handling it, if that contains what the function, what you're saying, that's questionable. But as a behavior, that controlling a switch, that would be the easy task.
Yeah.
Easy task. And monkey must be using other, more simpler mechanism for that. And that's we have to be careful. We expect the monkey to do the task, whatever we expect them to do, but they are very good at cheating us. So that's have to be very careful.
So unfortunately, I am afraid we have to stop these discussions despite it's very interesting. So Atsushi, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.